Lesson number one, embrace the adversity. Hold on to it and embrace it. There's a near certainty that you are going to face hardship in your personal and professional life. Chances are you already have. There will be the job you don't get. There'll be the project that doesn't go the way you planned it. There's going to be the boss who treats you unfairly for no particular reason. The question is not if some of these things are going to happen to you. The question is how you're going to respond when things like this happen to you. Or to paraphrase one of my favorite philosopher boxers, Mike Tyson, he said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And COVID was a thunderous Mike Tyson uppercut. But as tough as it was, there was inspiration. If you look around, for example, doctors who could no longer see their patients in person started to pivot and treat patients the 21st century way, using telehealth platforms, reinventing the way they did things, embracing the adversity. Offices were closed, meeting rooms were emptied, but then they got replaced with a brand new world of virtual collaboration, and productivity went up. Even on the individual level, there are scores of inspiring examples, like that of a guy named Ian Ostreich. Ian was a fitness coach, and like many people, he lost his job. His gym shut down. But rather than roll over and give up, he embraced the adversity. Seeing a boom in bicycling, he decided to go for it and launch his own small startup called Backyard Bicycles. It's a pop-up bicycle repair business. And overnight, his business took off. It exploded. He took a bad situation and turned it around and turned into one of possibility and entrepreneurship. Here's the thing. We can be certain that we are going to face adversity, but it's the hardships, the times that challenge you to your very core, that are going to determine who you are and what you become. Remember this, you'll be defined not by what you achieve, but by how you persevere. Embrace the adversity, because it's going to come. It's all a question of what you do with it. Number two, people come first. You probably have learned this. We forget it sometimes, but I want to dwell on this about people. I bet that sometime over your career, you will be in charge of developing a new product, leading a new venture, or maybe launching a startup business. And while it's tempting to think about what the product or service will do, you must never forget about who it's for and why. It's become fashionable to talk about customer centricity, but the truth is, we often forget to think about or even care about people. But COVID reminded us about putting people first. It became the number one priority. So whether it was a restaurant building privacy huts to make people feel safe and have a meal, or student engineers, a lot like you guys, taking time away from their studies to 3D print masks and other PPE. We had to think about, one of my personal favorite stories is called Radio Recliners. If you haven't heard of it, it's a story about a group of designers from Atlanta who saw the hardship of seniors and wanted to do something about it. So Radio Recliners is the first of its kind pirate radio station run by senior citizens for senior citizens. A simple way to combat the loneliness, the loss of connection, the isolation that they were facing. We forgot about them. This was just one little way they were able to give back, thinking about the experience of people in retirement homes, long-term care centers. It's these stories and the hundreds of others like them that serve as a reminder to me, to us, that we develop things not for store shelves or to generate revenue or to maximize profit. That's all well and good. But ultimately, it's about people. So put people first, every time. The third lesson that I want to share is learn the rules, then break them. Order and rules are really important. Every civilization, every company needs them. They prevent chaos, They sometimes protect us from ourselves. But the measure of a person isn't only if they uphold the rules, it's having the courage to question the rules, especially when they're holding back progress, or they're just a plain stupid rule. Ones that have just been lingering, we never decided to challenge it. In the words of General MacArthur, he famously said, "We're remembered for the rules we break, not the ones we follow." And during COVID, there were so many rules and customs and practices that we ordinarily followed in the before times, but they had to be broken. And we needed the courage to break them. The rule in vaccine development, for example, is that you couldn't possibly develop a vaccine in under 5 years. You couldn't. People said it'd take 10 to 15. And then it was done in 1. CEO said employees couldn't possibly be productive working from home. And then they were. Companies like Dyson and Ford, who never worked in healthcare, were suddenly redesigning and producing ventilators for hospitals. So many rules had to and were broken and just fundamentally rewritten. But one of my favorite ones of rule breaking started in the kitchen of a husband and wife, everyday people. It was only last May, if you remember, ICUs all around the country were facing dire N95 mask shortages. You couldn't find them. There was panic. A doctor, her name's Lori Hamima, she's a family physician. She was responsible for overseeing a large healthcare system in Ohio, had just found out from her higher ups that basically they were going to run out of masks right at a time that the coronavirus was surging. It was going to hit. So hearing this, her husband, Kevin, who was an engineer in a company called Battelle, a nonprofit research organization, he decided that maybe we need to break a rule. He said to her, what if we just reuse the masks, knowing well that you don't reuse masks? And his wife said, you can't do that. The experts told him, you can't do that. You have to dispose of it after single use. And normally you'd be right. That would be the rule. But he dusted off an old study about decontamination, and then he set out to break the rule. Got his wife to help him out, and that night, he and his wife stayed up all night. They sketched out schematics for a decontamination technology that didn't yet exist. And within 5 days, Kevin's company, Battelle, was already testing this wild concept out. Within a couple of months, more than 60 systems were already being shipped to institutions all around the United States and making a difference for frontline healthcare workers. All because he didn't want to accept that the rule was written in the stars. We have to break them sometimes. So here's the thing. Rules serve purpose. There's good reason for them, but sometimes they have to be broken. And because there's no guidebook or internet search that's going to tell you when to follow a rule and when to break a rule, you and you alone are going to have to rely on your intellect and your courage to make a choice of when to follow a rule or when to break it. And that is perhaps the most important thing you'll learn as a professional, is that judgment and risk-taking and bravery, because sometimes you just have to go out and do it. Lastly, my final piece of advice: treat life more like a squiggle than a straight line. Yes, I said squiggle. What's a squiggle? Well, it's one of those lines that go all over the place. Let me elaborate. 25 years ago, I stood right where you are now. Well, not exactly. I'm not standing in your family room or your kitchen, but you know what I mean. I stood as a college graduate. I just graduated from Trenton State College. I got my accounting degree, and as I accepted my diploma, I was so certain that my future would follow a predictable, stepwise, metronomic path. I would take a job with one of the big 6 firms. I would work as a staff auditor, eventually progress to manager, and then finally reach the summit of professional certainty, partner. But what really happened was very far from linear. It was more of a squiggle or a zigzag. Yes, I did get my CPA and became an accountant, and I did take a job at a big firm. But after 2 years, I discovered something really startling. I really didn't like being an accountant. In fact, I really disliked it. And admittedly, it was a little late on that revelation, but suddenly my clear and deliberate career path became very murky. I mean, I'd invested 4 years of college, 2 years of work. How could I possibly change my career now? What would I tell my parents? What would I tell my friends? It would take an unexpected phone call and a chance meeting in New York City to change my fortune. One that I could have never predicted or planned for, but by remaining open to change and possibility, the winds of fortune blew in a totally different direction for me. Within a month, I quit my job, I changed my career, and I embarked on a totally new path. And thus, I started my circuitous 25-year odyssey, which took me from being a CPA to a consultant, market researcher, marketer, head of worldwide innovation at Pfizer, now the founder of a couple of startup companies, and loving it, loving the decisions that I made. But of course, now, with the benefit of hindsight, I can tell you that the decisions I made during and after college, they worked out. They worked out great. But as a recent grad, I didn't know that they would. So you may be sitting here right now wondering, as freshly minted graduates, or soon to be, how will I know that I'm making the right decision? How will I know I'm making the right choices? And the answer is, you won't. Only time will tell you that. Instead, rather than worry about the unknown, enjoy the ride. Embrace every chance meeting. Welcome every unexpected invitation. Explore each possibility with the same verve and interest that you would with the first time you see it. If you keep a positive outlook, if you break a few rules along the way, if you give a damn about your fellow human beings, chances are you're going to end up in exactly the place you're supposed to be. Life always seems like it should follow a straight line. And more often than not, it doesn't. But if you're prepared to zig when life zags, you're going to crush it. That I'm 100% sure of.